Greetings, math fans. All right, so today's we're going to kind of do a little bit more with the radicals, but we're going to do something a little more radical. Get it? A little more radical. Anyway, okay, it's a bad joke. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called imaginary numbers. So again, it's kind of an odd topic. So imaginary, it's a G, imaginary numbers. And you say, well, what do you mean by imaginary numbers? Well, an imaginary number, here's the deal. If I have the square root of -1, if you put that in your calculator, you're going to get an error. Okay? So now we're going to be able to deal with negative square roots. And this is actually pretty critical here. The square root of -1, very important, we use the letter I, and it's a lowercase I. So this is actually really, really important. The square root of -1 is I. Okay? Very, very important. So let's see how we're going to go about using this. If I said something like the square root of -4, this is what I'd like you guys to do. I'd like you to say the square root of, just like you broke it up before. You know how you said, if I just said 4, you said, oh, it's 2 times 2, and you broke it up? I'd like you to start the problem out this way, where you pull out a negative 1 in there. Okay, because now, what's the square root of -1? Well, it's I. So the I comes out, and you have the square root of 4 left over. Okay, and then, so this is the only difference between all the other stuff we've learned in the past and now is you're going to have a negative, and as soon as you see a negative, you take the -1 out, and there's an I out there, and now you deal everything the same. This is all the same stuff. So what's the square root of 4? It's 2. So the answer to this problem is, and this is all multiplication, it's I times root 4. So the answer is 2I. That's the answer to that problem. Okay? So again, I can say that square root of -25. You're going to tell me, oh, that's the square root of -1 times 25. And then I can say, well, I'm going to pull the I out. Sounds pretty gruesome. So it's I and then root 25. And then again, you deal with the root 25. And what's the square root of 25? It's 5. So the answer is 5I. Now, please don't tell me I5. Okay, if you tell me I5, I'm going to think we're playing Battleship, right? I5, hit. You know, B7, hit. You sunk my battleship. All right, so you don't tell me I5. I want 5I, just like a variable. You say 2x, or you say 5x, right? You don't say x5. Right? Nobody says x5. It's always the number in front of the variable, and we kind of treat the I like a variable. Okay? All right, so let's get to a little more complicated ones, but not really that big of a deal. If I said the square root of -20. So once again, I'm going to write it as -1 times 20, and I'm going to pull that out. So I have I root 20. And then you deal with that root 20. Okay, root 20 is, remember, you guys always say, write this on top of your paper, 2, 3, 5, and 7. That's what you got to write on the top of your paper. Okay, so I'm going to have, I'm going to divide, of course, 20 by 2, and I get 2 times 10, and I'm going to divide 10 by 2, so I really wind up getting is 2 times 2 times 5. You guys should be pretty good at that now. So this comes out. So my final answer to this problem is 2I, and then I have a 5 left over. So 2I root 5. Okay? It's not bad, right? It's actually pretty easy. Okay, you just got to kind of remember the just the rule with the I. Not bad. Okay. How about this one? So we've got the square root of negative, let's go with square root of -40. Okay, so I'm going to do I, which are going to have a -1 here, and then 40. 40 minus 2 is 20, so 2 times 20. 20 divided by 2 is 10, so 2 times 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5, so that's it. So we got everything broken up as much as possible. 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, that's 40. And of course we have a pair of 2's. And we have this -1, so we're going to pull the I out and the 2. So we have a 2I on the outside, and what do we have left over? 2 times 5 is 10. And that's our final answer. Okay, so that's all. That's pretty easy. Here's the deal. What happens if I throw another negative on the outside of this? So square root of negative, and then let's do negative 27. So please don't cancel these out. The negative and the negative don't just like cancel and go, oh, cool, it's a positive. Again, I'm going to leave that negative on the outside, and then I'm going to split this up so that you got negative 1 and 27. Well, 2 doesn't go into it, so I'm going to do 3. So it's actually 3 times 3 times 3. That's what you break it up in. So I'm going to leave the negative there. So what's the square root of negative 1? I. What's the square root of 3? Times 3, right, is 3. And left over is a 3. So really, you got negative 3i root 3. That's your final answer. Okay, so negatives don't really do anything at all, except they just kind of change the sign of the final answer, right? No big deal. Okay, that's pretty good so far. Hopefully nobody's crying. If you are, then just go to your room and get some Kleenex. Okay, so let's do how about a fraction? Let's do negative 9 over 25. Well, the deal is, I know that negative is on top, and in fact, if I change this problem just a little bit and I put the negative here, I want you to understand that negative does not belong to both the top and the bottom. Okay, only put it on top. It's important to put it on top. I'm going to erase that, if I can erase it here. Okay, and I'm going to put the negative right here. It's just easier that way. It doesn't belong to both. Because if it belongs to both, math fans, this is what you'd have. You'd have the square root of negative 9 over negative 25. What's a negative over negative? Well, positive, so they'd cancel out, and that's not the same thing. So you don't even have that. It just goes to the top. Okay, so let's split up. We've done this before. Square root of negative 9 over square root of 25. Okay, so that's easy, right? This is negative 1 times 3 times 3, and the bottom is 5 times 5. Okay, cool. So we can take out the negative 1, which just becomes an I, take out the 3, so it's 3i, and the bottom, take out a 5. There's no root left over. So the answer is 3i over 5. What? All right, it's not bad. Pretty easy. Okay, that's how you deal with fractions. All right. So let's do just a kind of a quick problem where you just do multiplication. So again, I told you this, the I is treated like a variable. So if I have 2 times 5i, that's equal to 10i. It's like super easy. Okay, negative 6 times 3i. Well, that's negative 18i. Okay, not a big deal, right? So that's pretty easy to do multiplication. I mean, I can even get a little crazy and watch. Well, actually, before you even get to this, I got to show you a couple things now. So we're done with as far as simplifying a square root with a negative. So let's talk about this. If I have, this is a completely separate topic. There's I to the 0 power, I to the first power, I to the second power, and I to the third power. There are 4 different possibilities for I to the 0, I to the 1, I to the 2, I to the 3. Okay? Let's go through what each of these means. I would say this probably goes on your note sheet because this is something that you just need to remember. Anything to the 0 power is, and before you say 0, it's not 0. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the first power is itself, so that's just I. Now these are the 2 that you don't know yet. I squared is negative 1, and I cubed is negative I. So this really is important. Okay, that needs to be on some note sheet someplace, okay, to explain what it is. I to the 0 is 1, I to the first is I to the second is negative 1, and I to the third is negative I. Okay, so here's the next thing we're going to do. I'm going to write a little note on the bottom here. You are never allowed to have an exponent with I. Okay, you're never allowed to have an exponent. So if you put a final answer of I squared, I'm going to mark it wrong. I'm going to say equals -1. If you write I to the 0, I'm going to mark it wrong and say equals 1. If you I to the third, I'm going to mark it wrong and say you have to just write -I. Okay, you'll never have an exponent. Never allowed, I should really say allowed. Never allowed to have an exponent with I. Ever, ever, ever. Okay? So here's the deal. If you have I to the 6th power, well, what do you do with that? Because I have I to the 0, 1, 2, 3. How do I deal with I to the 6th? This is how you deal with it. Okay, pay close attention here. All right? You take your exponent, so exponent, and you divide it by, I'm going to put this in bold red, divided by 4. Okay, you take your exponent and you divide it by 4. Now here's the deal. You're going to have a remainder. Okay, so you're going to have a remainder of, let's say if I type in the calculator, it's either going to be a number with nothing after, no decimal. You're going to have a remainder of 0.25. You have a remainder of 0.50 or a remainder of 0.75. One of those possibilities when you divide something by 4. Okay, so if I just try on your calculator, if you do 1 divided by 4, you get 0.25. 2 divided by 4 equals 0.50. 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. 4 divided by 4 equals, again, the remainder is equal to actually 1.0. So again, I'm looking at this number here. 5 divided by 0, or 5 by 4, 1.25. 6 divided by 4 is 1.50. Okay, so when I divide by 4, this is all I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about just the remainder. Okay? So one of the teachers, I give her credit for it, Ms. Balk showed me, I thought it was a pretty good idea. She's a new teacher this year, and she said, the way she shows her kids, because I really want you getting a remainder, guys. I really need this remainder. So if you have, and she said she uses the quarter system. I really like that. It's a great idea. So if you have 0.25, that's 1/4, right? 1/4. What about, so 1Q. What about 0.50? Isn't that 50 cents? Isn't that 2 quarters? And what about 0.75? Isn't that 75 cents? Isn't that 3 quarters? And what happens when I have a 0? I don't have any quarters left. No quarters. So you're either going to have 1/4 if it's 0.25, 2 quarters, which is 50 cents, 3 quarters, which is 75 cents, or if it divides evenly, if it's like $1 or $2 or $3, there are no quarters there, right? No change. Okay, so I like that. All right, I'm throwing a lot at you here, but see how this is. It's a little difficult to read that, but see how you have different quarters: 1/4, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 0 quarters. Well, look at this. This is what I want to point out. See this: 0 quarters, 1/4, 2 quarters, and 3 quarters. Okay, so if there's 0 quarters left, it's I to the 0, which is 1. If there's 1/4, if there's 1/4 left, it's I to the 1st power because it's 1/4. If there's so that's 0.25. It's 0.50. It's 50 cents, which is 2 quarters. Now we're at this guy right here. So I squared, which is -1. And if it's 0.75 is a remainder, that means it's 3 quarters. Okay, so I gave you kind of a lot of stuff here, but I just want to talk a little bit about knowing what the remainder is. That's like the biggest thing. If you know what the remainder is, then we're going to go back to the original problem here. So I'm going to erase everything here just so I can get back to some of these problems here. All right, let's figure out the number of quarters. Okay, that's like, what? This is like a completely random topic. No, it's not. Okay, so I want to try to get everyone should have your calculators out. If I said, I'm always dividing by 4, by the way. Always, always, always dividing by 4. Always, 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 always. So if I have 51, and so I'm going to say it's I to the 51. So I'm going to take 51 and I'm going to divide it by 4. Okay, if I take 51 divided by 4, okay, that's going to give me 12.75. So I don't care about the 12. The 12, I completely ignore that. I only want to know about the 0.75. How many quarters is that? Isn't 75 cents 3 quarters? So if you can tell me that that is 3/4, that means you can tell me that is equal to I to the third power. Okay, and let me write all these numbers down here. I to the 0, I to the 1, I to the 2, I to the 3. So that's equal to 1, that's equal to I, that's equal to -1, and that's equal to I squared. Oh, I squared, equal to negative I. Sorry, getting a little crazy here. So negative I. There we go. So this, again, I'm going to kind of, this is important. So we're going to put that a little over there on the side. Okay. So remember that 0, 1, 2, 3 is the number of quarters you have. So we did I to the 51, and you said 51 divided by 4 is something which was said 12.75. I only care about the 0.75. How many quarters is that? 3. So you're going to say, oh, I cubed. You go look at this chart here. Oh, it's negative I. So that's your final answer. I've kind of done a lot of stuff just to get to this final answer, but once you have practice on it, it really is not difficult at all. All right, let's try another one here. How about I to the 38th power? So you're going to do, on the side here, I'm going to do 38 divided by 4. If you do that, you're going to get 9.5. So 9.50. Okay. Again, what don't I care about? Do not care about that 9 at all. All right. What do I care about? That 0.5. So 50 cents. How many quarters do I have? Hey, 2 quarters. What's I squared? Look at your chart. -1. So personally, if I would have my note sheet, what I would actually have on my note sheet is I would say you got to divide it by 4, and this chart would be in my note sheet. Okay. That's what I would have in my note sheet. Right, and now maybe an example, a couple of examples too, right? It's always friendly to have another couple of examples. So here we go. Let's do I to the 25th power. So what you're going to do, you're going to say 25 divided by 4 is 6.25. Hey, okay, cross off the 6. How many quarters do I have? Only 1 quarter. What? That's cheap. Okay, so I to the first power. In fact, you know what? Let's see. I'm going to try and erase this little spot right here. Let's see if it's going to work. Ooh, that's good. Because it's just easier to read. I made it ugly. Okay, there we go. Oh, it's perfect. Okay, so anyway, I to the 1 power is I. Remember, guys, no exponents. If I see an I squared, I to the 5th, I whatever, it's wrong. Just I. I is all by itself. Think about it. If it's just I, you're all by yourself. If it's you and me, then we're together. But if it's just I, then you're all by itself. Oh, I like that. I made that up. So maybe I'll tell somebody about it. Oh, I just told you. So okay. So I'm going to erase this part because I want to do a little more practice. So I'm just going to erase this left-hand side here. Okay, so let's just do a couple more. I to the 100th power. Okay, so 100 divided by 4 equals 25. And 25.0. So again, no quarters. So it's I to the 0, which is, if you look at the chart, 1. So how about I to the 101? Well, 101 divided by 4 is 25.25. 1 quarter, so it's I to the 1, which is I. Okay, I'm going to work my way up. I to the 102. So 102 divided by 4 is 25.50. Ah, 2 quarters. I squared. What's I squared? -1. How about I to the 103? So 103 divided by 4 is 25.75. Aha! 75 cents, 3 quarters. So that's -I. Okay, if I do one more, right? I to the 104. So 104 divided by 4 is 26.00, right? Nothing, it's 26. So no quarters. So I to the 0 is 1. One last one, I to the 105, it's the nurse's office. Okay, 105 divided by 4 is 26.25. Oh, 1 quarter. So I to the 1, which is I. Okay, so hopefully you guys are good with that. That is actually, it's a really important to deal with, just to know that. Okay, so let's apply it a little bit. You have a couple problems like this in your homework, just where I ask you what is I to whatever power. But you also have problems like these. So let me show you now some problems. Okay. If I have the square root of -3 times the square root of -5, here's the deal. You cannot multiply these together. The first thing you have to do, so first thing is you need to get rid of the square roots, the negatives, and the square roots. That's the very first thing you have to do. Do not multiply anything together. You are going to basically you're going to pull out an I. It sounds really violent, but you got to pull out an I. So what's going to happen is, if you want to write this out, it's -1 times 3, and this one is -1 times 5. So I'm going to pull the -1 out, and I'm going to get an I, and I'm going to pull a -1 out of here. I get I and then root 5. Okay, now I multiply together. So I times I is I squared. And I can't do anything with the 3 and the 5, so it's root 15. If you leave it like this, what am I going to do? I'm going to take a point off because I squared is not allowed. You're not allowed to have an exponent. And if you look at your nice little fancy chart, okay, I squared is -1. This is equal to -1. Okay, so the answer is -1 root 15. That's your final answer. Okay. So it's not bad. So let's do another one here. The square root of -6 times the square root of -12. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that I out, so I'm going to get -1 times 6 times -1 times 12. All right, so I take that out, I get I root 6 times I root 12. So that's going to give you I squared. And guys, this is like the old days. Don't multiply 6 times 12 together. You got to split it up anyway. So what's 6? 2 times 3. What's 12? 2 times 2 times 3. Okay? So we're going to do a couple things here. First of all, what's I squared? You should look at your little chart. I squared is -1. So it's -1. I can pull out a pair of 2's and I can pull out a pair of 3's. So I pull out a pair of 2's, I get a 2. I pull out a pair of 3's, I get 3. And what's left over? This is the only thing left over, 2. So that 2 goes inside the radical. And then I multiply everything together. That gives me -6 root 2. And that's your final answer. Okay? About as difficult as it gets. It really is. Okay? So the only thing I've taught you how to do is deal with the I. That's all you're doing. Okay? So a couple more here real quickly. Let's just throw a couple more negatives in here, because negatives sometimes get a little confusing. So if I have negative the square root of -8 times the square root of -50. So this is about as tough as it gets, to be honest with you. All right, got a bunch of negatives on the outside, no big deal. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with the negatives in the inside of the parentheses. Okay, I got to deal with, these are super important. Deal with that and deal with that. So let's do it. So that's negative, that stays on the outside. And we're going to do -1 times, and 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. And the other one is, again, negative, I don't know, oh yeah, -1. And then 50 is, if I divide that by 2, I get 25. Divide it by 5, and divide it by 5. That's it completely broken up. So the first thing you do is you're going to deal with those. So that is negative, so that negative's already here, so there's an I there, comes out. And I have 2 times 2 times 2. And then this one's the I is going to come out. So I have an I, and I have 2 times 5 times 5. Okay? So this is a little complicated, but here's the deal. Multiply these together. What's I times I squared? So I have negative I squared, and now let's put everything under one radical because I need to pull stuff out. Okay, I'm just going to keep cursoring down here a little bit more. All right, so what is I squared? If you look at your little chart, it should say negative 1. So it's negative of a negative 1, which is, of course, just 1. Okay, so now we dealt with that. It's just equal to 1. Now let's look for pairs of numbers. Here's a pair of 2's. Here's another pair of 2's. And here's a pair of 5. What? I can pull everything out. So I have no radical left. So I'm going to multiply that by the pair of 2's comes out. This one comes out. And this one comes out. So my final answer is all that multiplied together. 1 times 2, which is 2, times 2 is 4, times 5 is 20. So my answer to this entire big old nasty problem is 20. So look at the original problem. So the problem is negative square root of negative 8 times the square root of negative 50 is equal to 20. What? That's it? You just got to, it's not like it's difficult. It's just you got to be you have to be methodical, we call it. Okay, where you actually have to do everything that I told you for every kind of problem. Okay, there's nothing different about any of these problems. You take an I out first, and then you deal with the square roots. That's all it is. You take the I out. Now sometimes you have to multiply the i's together, and remember, no exponent with an I. Okay, and then you got to know that little chart of I to the 0, I to the 1, I to the 2, I to the 3. Okay? So that was kind of a long lesson, but I covered a lot of stuff, caught a bunch of different problems in about 27 minutes. So hopefully you guys are good to go with all this, and you got to practice this though. All practice, math fans, all practice. All right? Anyway, you have an outstanding day. Adios. Goodbye.